Hi, I'm Ekwo, and this is Outbound, a podcast by EF Education First that showcases transformative travel stories that defy our expectations, challenge our assumptions, and teach us something new about the world and ourselves. When Sam graduated from college, he was underwhelmed with the situation. He had just spent half a decade studying science and was living above a bodega outside of Boston with too many roommates and not enough inspiration. Eventually, a family friend gave him some words of wisdom that he just needed to start somewhere. And Sam landed an oddball gig at a local research lab.
And I received some really good advice from a family friend who said I should probably just start working somewhere so that I could tell people I wasn't a bum.
It turned out that the lab was doing research in Antarctica. And so when the time came, Sam got to go. The experience blew his mind. He had found something he could finally sink his teeth into. After returning to Boston, he needed to find a way back. He needed to dig deeper.
When I got back after that first trip, the absence of that kind of magical energy that you feel when you're down there only sunk in, a number of months later. And it's this connection with this large group of people who are equally passionate and excited about science, the outdoors, travel, exploration, and this connection with the natural beauty of the landscape on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour, minute-by-minute basis that really felt lacking when you're back in the city. So that's, I think, when it really started to dawn on me how important that was in my life.
In this new world, Sam also found a different version of himself. A Sam who had to simplify, a Sam who had to survive, a Sam with absolute focus. Today on Outbound, we'll hear the story of who Sam becomes in the South Pole, the beauty of the journey to get there, the sacrifice involved, and what it all means for Sam once he gets back home.
It was only months later when I called my boss back up on the phone and I said, "Hey man, how do I get back in the game?"
It turns out that the only way back into the game was to do the Antarctic winter. The way Sam describes it, it's a very different beast than the Antarctic summer that Sam had just completed.
When the scientists are there in the summertime, there's probably 200 people on the station. They're only there for 2.5 months. That's the summer season. And once it gets to 50 below, everybody's got to get out because the Air National Guard wants to stop flying at that temperature for the safety of the crew. And things become much more difficult once it gets to 50 below. So at that point, that's probably mid-February is the beginning of the winter, even though the sun is still up. And the last plane leaves, and then it's another 9 months before the first plane comes in. So it's a long haul, and you are completely stuck there. There's no in or out that's easily achieved. So this is up on the plateau at 10,000 feet. It's pan flat. There's snow and ice in every direction. It's almost as if you're in Montana with the big sky effect. And it's dry. It's extremely dry. It's the biggest desert in the world, actually, which a lot of people don't realize, but it's a big, high desert.
The research that Sam was working on was a big deal. By some accounts, literally the biggest deal of any research happening in astronomy at that time. Sam was operating a high-tech telescope, looking for patterns in space that could change humanity's understanding about the origins of the universe.
And so it looks at light that's in the microwave frequencies, and the light that it's looking at has been traveling towards us since the very first moments of the universe. What that means is you basically take your telescope and you point it at a patch of sky that is particularly clean and lacking stuff in the way, so other galaxies and galaxy clusters and stars, and you point it there and you make a map. And you make a map of the furthest stuff you can see, trying to look back all the way to the beginning. And what you make is you make a map of the patterns in that light. And it's this speckled map of very, very, very small differences in the intensity of both the light and the polarization, so the angle of the light, if you will. And when you make that map and you look at these patterns, you can learn things about how the Big Bang happened.
Sam had just had a taste of being part of something truly immense. He knew that a winter in Antarctica would be extreme and that the work would be intense, but he had already come a long way from the apartment above the bodega. He knew what he had to do.
I remember standing there and going, oh shit, I have to do this. You just know that you will never live with yourself if you don't go for it. And next thing I know, I'm headed to New Zealand, and I'm getting on a Air National Guard C-130 transport plane, and you're in the cargo hold with pallets of scientific equipment and supplies and all sorts of other gear. You come in and you start to see the icebergs and the mountains, and as you come into McMurdo, which is the logistics base on the coast, it's where all of the U.S. operations are based. There's Mount Erebus, which is this 10,000 or 12,000 foot volcano, which is on an island, and it rises out of the ocean, and it's just the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. And then you land on the ice shelf next to that, and you get out of the plane, and it's just everything you ever imagined about Antarctica. It's crazy mountains and icebergs and seals and just the most beautiful, pristine blue sky. When you're in McMurdo, there's a hill called Observation Hill, which is a quick hike that everybody does, and you can go up there and look out on the ice shelf and the volcano and back into town. And it's called Observation Hill because when Sir Robert Falcon Scott first tried to get to the South Pole in, 1912 or 1911, his team that was waiting for him at his hut would climb Observation Hill every day and look for him as he was supposed to be returning from the pole. And in fact, he never made it. He died en route back from the pole. And so there's a memorial to him up there on top of the hill. And his original hut is actually still down in town. And there are still seals that they caught 100 years ago that have been left outside the hut and are frozen, that they just never ate. And so you can't help but feel like you're in this time capsule. And yeah, you've come there on a giant military cargo plane, but you could totally imagine yourself arriving there by boat and nothing's changed. It's the same place.
Sam left New Zealand for Antarctica on December 12th, but was stuck on McMurdo, an old base that serves as a center of logistics closer to the edge of Antarctica. From there, Sam would have to take another flight to actually get to the South Pole.
I remember thinking to myself, I would love to make it to the South Pole for Christmas. It's a beautiful flight because you go up over the Transantarctic Mountains up onto the plateau, and you fly over the Beardmore Glacier and some of the other glaciers that are coming. You know, the plateau is flowing, or the ice on the plateau is flowing down through the mountains and out to the ocean over hundreds of thousands of years. And luckily there was a clearing in the weather, and we made it to the South Pole, and we arrived just in time for Christmas dinner.
Sam was able to enjoy a Christmas dinner in Antarctica and share in the company of the many unique characters that work at the pole over the summer season. Then, a month later, the summer crew wraps up, the last flight leaves, dark settles in, and only a skeleton crew remains to fulfill essential, crucial functions.
So during the winter, everybody's just kind of sinking into a routine where you're working, and there's kind of a day-to-day schedule. We try and maintain a 9-to-5 schedule. It's dark all the time, so you're trying to maintain some semblance of a normal life. And there's breakfast in the morning, people work, there's lunch, people work in the afternoon, and then there's dinner. And people have, everybody's got projects to do. We're working on our scientific instruments, but back in the station, other people are working on fixing floors, fixing plumbing, fixing heavy equipment, whatever it takes to keep the place running. And there's plenty of normal stuff too. I mean, we have parties and celebrate midwinter dinner and watch movies, work out. Just the normal things that people do. It's just a little different because everybody's, stuck in the same building. And people are always coming up with funny ways to appreciate the cold. So whether that means, taking boiling water outside in the middle of the winter and tossing it into the air and hearing it freeze in the air, or sleeping out in a tent at 90 below for the night. People are very inventive and have a lot of fun with it in a safe way. I mean, I guess people have trouble with the darkness, and it disrupts their sleeping patterns, and, people get depressed and all that kind of stuff, so I've heard. But you're in this place where you're on top of the blue marble that's the earth, and you're standing there and everything is spinning around you perfectly, and you have this incredibly unobstructed view. For me, I didn't want to sleep. I mean, every moment was precious. Every second, the light is different. And I can think of countless times where I've been with my family watching the sunset. Everybody watches the sunset. It's this fun thing to do, right? And the light's changing, and everybody's oohing and aahing, and, ooh, look at that, there it goes. But at the South Pole, it happens once. It happens once every year, the sun sets. And it rises once every year. And so those moments that anywhere else are 1 second may last for 3 hours. And so you have 3 hours to appreciate a certain light. The way it glances off this building, the way it glances off the snow, the way it looks with these type of clouds. And so you have 3 hours to really understand that beauty. But then it's gone, and it's gone for a year. And if you're not coming back, you may never see it again. And so for me, I just never wanted to go to sleep. My daily routine was completely dictated by the instrument that I was running. So it had its own natural cycle of cooling itself and heating back up and cooling itself and observing and sometimes breaking and then needing to be fixed. And you get really connected with this inanimate object. The sounds are so critical. I mean, you come to learn every single sound that it makes. As an engineer, that's, what you're trained to do. The sounds are clues to the health of the machine. But even more than that, it becomes, something that's just this constant part of your life. And it's hard to describe the sounds that the instrument makes. It's this high-pitched chirping of the helium compressors all day long, every single day.
This is an actual recording of the Bicep 3 telescope.
it's this rushing of cold gas and under pressure, and it's kind of a squeaking noise. And then you've got the howling of the wind outside the building, slapping against the outside, and you're listening among this racket. You're listening for anything that's out of place, and you really become kind of one with this machine. And I think that's the most rewarding part, is that you've worked hard on it, your teammates have worked hard on it, everybody else is really excited about it working well, and you just put your life into it.
This feeling is what drew Sam back to the South Pole. The severe natural beauty of the landscape and the science itself, these were the backdrop. But the real magic that Sam yearned for was the opportunity to fully pour his life into a single focus, separate from all the rest. And where else but Antarctica?
And so while this, everybody else was kind of on this 9-to-5 schedule, I was out in the lab doing whatever I needed to do. And I'd stay out there for a period of a couple days alone. And then I'd come back, grab some food, and go back. And so it was kind of a wild existence to walk out of a station with 40 other people and go off into the blowing storm and total darkness with just a headlamp following a flag line, knowing that you'll eventually get to the lab. And when you get out there and you've been living out there for 2 days alone, and you go up on the roof and you know that there's just nobody around, it's a very trippy thing. I think the hardest thing to stay focused on is your sense of perspective. When you're with a small group of people in an isolated environment, no matter how much you try to rise above the daily frustrations that can arise, or the interpersonal issues that can become problems, you always get worn down and you get tired and you get exhausted, and it can be hard to realize how exhausted you are without somebody reminding you, especially when you're passionate about the project you're working on. You can get really into it and kind of lose focus on, how hard you're working yourself.
One day, a piece of the telescope broke. Remember that the technology in the telescope is really sophisticated, and the measurements that it is taking need to be extremely precise. It's studying light patterns from billions of years ago. Also, Sam and his crew don't have access to a Home Depot. If they don't have a specific screw or tool they need, they literally have to find a way to make it. So, to say the least, Sam was hesitant to turn the machine off and open it up. He wasn't sure if it would turn back on again. But eventually, he had to go for it.
So we had to basically shut this thing down that everybody had put months and months and years of their life into building. And with the hope that it would come back to life once we made the fix. And so the fix involved climbing under this thing, kind of like working on the bottom of a car. And you had to slide in on your back and take this joint apart and pull out a spare and get that in there and reconnect all these helium hoses and cable data lines and all this other stuff. And meanwhile, you're working upside down, and it's just like working on a car. You got wrenches hidden up in crooks and crannies, and you've got stuff falling on your face. And I remember this one point where I had wedged myself into the inner belly of the beast, as it were, the telescope, and I had made this little fixture to position something, and I was tightening a screw, and I kept telling myself, if you go another half turn, this thing's gonna pop. It's gonna break. and you better not do that because it's going to be another 2 days to fix this thing. And I remember turning it and going, oh man, just another quarter turn. Almost there. And then pop, just shattered this piece of aluminum, just snapped it in half. I was like, oh. And at that point, there's no one to, I mean, the worst part is there's no one to yell at. You know, there's no one to scream and be like, why'd you do that, you idiot? Because you're just there alone. And you got to then climb out, go back and get a different tool, and then you got to go make something, then you got to walk back across the ice to the other building, and then you know, this constant process. And by the time I finished this operation, I had every tool in the lab out, spread around. I mean, I had mirrors and hammers and Allen wrenches and socket wrenches and torque wrenches and helium and all sorts of other stuff. And it was fun, but it was hard. It was, you know, a week of just beating yourself up. And you're working as fast as possible to make sure minimize the downtime. But at some point, you have to go to bed. No matter how much you want to push yourself, at some point, you got to go to bed because you'll start making mistakes. It's fun to operate like that as fast as you can, and it's work as hard as you can. But it does take a toll on you. You know, I remember when we did finally bring the thing back to life, I wanted to go sleep for a few days, but you know, I couldn't, because once you get it back online, then you got to make sure it stays alive. And this is the type of thing that I think is hard to articulate, even to yourself in the moment. There is a time when you need to let go, and a time when you need to take a step back. And trying to find the limit is the fun part for me. There can also be a disconnect between your life back home and your life down in the middle of nowhere. You're keeping touch with your family over satellite phone and trying to stay in touch with your friends over satellite phone every once in a while, but I think when you're going through some frustration with how your work's going or whatever's happening, it's hard to communicate that in a 10-minute phone call to people. And so the combination of the two can be hard. And this is all stuff I'm coming up with now, you know, reflecting back. I didn't know any of this at the time. But I think when you're going to go do something really intense, you have to set up the expectations about what it means for everything else. And the only way you go and sink your teeth into something wholly and completely is by sacrificing other parts of your life. And I think at the time you forget how much of sacrifice that is. So in the moment when you're just working every day and really excited about the lights and the, you know, the scientific results, you forget about that sacrifice because it's not there staring you in the face. And it's only when you come home that you realize that you have a price to pay. And that you got to go do this really cool thing, but now you have to go put time into this other thing that you neglected for a long time. But that's on a deep kind of level. There's also just some practical realities about coming back, which are hilarious, which is, I mean, you get off the plane in New Zealand, and it's one of the coolest experiences I've ever had. I mean, the smell is the first thing to smack you in the face. You lose your sense of smell when you're in that dry, high-altitude environment for a long time. We landed right before sunset, and the sweet, moist air, springtime New Zealand air hits you, and the smells are just incredible, and the sunset's incredible. And you're completely overwhelmed with all the people and cars and the internet in the hotel, and it's wild. It's totally wild to be able to go and get sushi or a hamburger or, anything you want, fresh fruit. And I remember being back in Boston, and I got back for Christmas, and I had to go Christmas shopping. I ended up at this mall, and I just was so out of it. I mean, I still had long hair and a beard and was in, Antarctic survival mode, and people were running around for Christmas deals, and they got the jingles playing in the mall, and the traffic, sitting in traffic. I mean, all these things just totally mind-blowing. Society makes you do all these things that you just don't want to do. I mean, you have to have an apartment to live in. You have to pay rent, electricity, water. Then you got to pay the cable bill. And then you got to have a car. And you got to have car insurance. And you got to have a credit card. And you got to have, all this stuff. And, all you want to do is go do the next thing. It can be really frustrating. I feel like everything moves so slowly. It's amazing how quickly time passes without, quote unquote, achieving anything. I mean, lots has been achieved since I've been back. I've been able to finally spend time with my family and my girlfriend. But on paper, you write down these things in your mind that you want to be able to do in a certain time frame. And all of a sudden, it just seems impossible.
Sam traveled from Boston to the South Pole and back again. He experienced an existence that was extreme in beauty and focus. The dilemma on his return was to figure out if that version of himself could coexist with the pieces of his life he had left behind.
It's really hard to not want that kind of adrenaline rush again. And it's hard to not want that experience all the time of just being in the zone. I think the place affects different people differently. I noticed that within our crew. Some people seemed more at home down there in the dark than they did, probably anywhere else. And I think it really is a second home for a lot of people. Maybe it's their first spiritual home. And I think that's why you see the same people coming back over and over and over again.
This year-long sunset was brought to you by EF Education First, the world leader in international education. Outbound is hosted by Echo Edzi, produced by me, Meg Martineau, and sound designed by Bailey Woraznik. The intro music is written by Ryan Jackson. If you want to submit your own transformational travel stories and have a chance to be featured on our show, you can do so on our website at www.eftours.com/podcast, where you can also listen to all of our episodes and find out more about EF. If you like what you hear, don't forget to subscribe. And if you ever want to say hi, you can email us at outbound@ef.com. We'd love to hear from you.